My name is Sloane, and for 60 months, I'd been inmate of 78492. Now, I was just a woman on a curb with $23 and a burning need to set the world on fire. 5 years ago, the Ashworth family had offered me a golden ticket, an internship at their gleaming corporate headquarters. I was a nobody from a nowhere town, top of my accounting class, naive enough to believe in meritocracy. I should have known it was too good to be true. When their multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme was uncovered, I was the perfect fall girl. My signature was on doctored documents, a small trusting scribble that sealed my fate. They had the best lawyers. I had a public defender who advised me to plead out. I took the deal. 5 years for a crime I didn't commit. My brother, Leo, his medical bills piling up from the cystic fibrosis that was slowly stealing his breath, couldn't afford a long trial. My silence bought his care. It was the only choice. Now I was out, and the Ashworths were about to learn that a quiet, observant woman with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous creature of all. My first stop wasn't a home, it was a graveyard. Leo's grave was simple, a small granite stone under a willow tree. He died 2 years into my sentence. The news came in a terse, official letter. Complications from his condition. I knew the complication. It was a heart broken by his sister's disgrace and the withdrawal of the financial support the Ashworths had promised him, support that vanished the second I was convicted. I placed a single, smooth stone I'd collected from the prison yard on his headstone. My throat was too tight for words. The grief was a physical weight, but underneath it was something harder, sharper. Purpose. "I'm going to make them pay, Leo," I whispered, the wind catching the words and carrying them away. "I promise." I had a name, the only piece of the puzzle I'd managed to glean before my world collapsed. Cale Merrick, the Ashworth's new head of security. A former Special Forces operative, a man with a reputation for being unshakably loyal, brutally efficient, and utterly unapproachable. He was the gatekeeper. If I could get to him, I could get to them. It took me a week of sleeping in a hostel that reeked of bleach and despair, and working a cash under the table diner job to save enough for presentable clothes. A simple black sheath dress from a thrift store, heels that didn't pinch too much. The invitation to the Ashworth Foundation's annual Spring Renewal Gala was notoriously easy to forge. Their security was arrogant, focused on keeping the rabble out, not expecting the rabble to have the audacity to walk right in. The event was held at the Ashworth estate, a monstrous display of old money and new arrogance. Marble floors, soaring ceilings, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and unearned privilege. I moved through the crowd like a ghost, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I saw them. Charles Ashworth, with his patrician smile, shaking hands. His wife, Eleanor, a diamond necklace glittering at her throat that probably cost more than my entire childhood neighborhood. And then I saw him, Cale Merrick. He stood apart from the glittering throng, a shadow against the gold-leafed walls. He was taller than I'd imagined, broader. He wore a tailored black suit, but it couldn't disguise the power in his shoulders, the stillness of a predator. His hair was dark, cropped close, and even from across the room, I could see the intensity of his gaze as it swept the crowd, missing nothing. A faint, pale scar cut through his left eyebrow. He was handsome in a way that was almost brutal, all sharp angles and quiet menace. This was the man I had to seduce. The plan, formed in the sterile loneliness of my cell, felt ludicrous now. How does a moth seduce a flame without being consumed? I took a deep breath, the scent of champagne and canapes turning my stomach. For Leo. I repeated the mantra like a prayer. For Leo. I positioned myself near a towering floral arrangement, pretending to be fascinated by a blossom I couldn't name. I waited, a mouse trying to lure a panther. My opportunity came when a waiter, flustered, stumbled with a tray of champagne flutes. The crystal shattered on the marble, a spectacular crash that drew every eye, including Cale Marek's. His focus snapped to the disruption, his body coiling with readiness for a split second before assessing it as a non-threat. In that moment of collective distraction, I acted. I slipped the small, custom-built device from my clutch, a wedding gift from a tech-savvy cellmate who'd hated cheaters, and palmed it. As I moved past the grand piano near where Cale had been standing, I dropped to one knee, pretending to fix the strap of my shoe. With a deft movement, I slid the device, no larger than a thumbnail, into the gap between the piano's polished wood and the plush carpet. A listening bug. Phase 1. As I stood, a hand closed around my upper arm. Not roughly, but with an undeniable, unbreakable firmness. "Can I help you?" The voice was low, a gravelly baritone that vibrated right through me. I looked up into the stormy gray eyes of Cale Merrick. Up close, he was even more intimidating. The scar was more pronounced, and his eyes held a weariness that seemed decades old. My breath hitched, a genuine reaction I didn't have to fake. My strap broke," I stammered, gesturing weakly to my shoe. "I was just—" His gaze swept over me, analytical, piercing. He wasn't looking at me as a woman, but as a variable, an anomaly. "You're not on the guest list." My blood ran cold. How could he possibly know that? I'd been so careful. "I'm a plus one," I said, forcing a lightness I didn't feel. "Of Ben Carter? From the Chronicle?" It was a name I'd plucked from the society pages, a calculated risk. Cale's eyes narrowed slightly. "Carter came alone." "Shit. Think, Sloane. Think." I let a flicker of embarrassed tears glass my eyes. A woman caught in a lie, not an enemy on a mission. "Okay, you caught me," I said, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "My friend Julia was supposed to bring me, but she bailed last minute. I really needed a night to feel pretty again." I gestured to my dress, a universal signal of feminine vulnerability. "It's been a rough year." I held my breath. He could have me thrown out. He could call the police. This entire plan could crumble before it even began. He studied my face for a long, heart-stopping moment. His eyes dropped to my lips, then back to my eyes, and I saw something shift. The relentless scrutiny softened by a fraction. He saw a pretty, sad girl, not a threat. He released my arm. "The event is concluding soon. Enjoy the champagne, but see yourself out afterwards. Don't make me escort you." It was a dismissal, a warning, but also a reprieve. He was letting me stay. "Thank you," I breathed, infusing the words with a gratitude that was, for once, entirely real. I turned to leave, my legs trembling, but his voice stopped me again. "Wait." I froze, my back to him. Had he seen the bug? Had he seen through me after all? "You dropped this." I turned slowly. He was holding out a small, thin silver chain, my mother's locket, the one thing I'd been allowed to keep in prison. I must have fumbled it when I planted the device. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through me. If he'd seen me drop it there, but his expression was neutral. He'd simply found a lost item. I took it from him, our fingers brushing. A spark, sudden and electric, jolted up my arm. His gaze flickered, and I knew he'd felt it too. That dangerous, unwelcome current. "Thank you," I said again, my voice barely a whisper. I didn't look back as I walked away, melting into the crowd. I could feel the weight of his gaze on my back until I disappeared around a corner. My heart was pounding, my skin still tingling from that brief contact. I had done it. I had gotten past him. I had planted my first seed. But as I stepped out into the cool night air, the taste of freedom was now mixed with the metallic tang of fear. And something else, something I refused to name. Because Cale Merrick wasn't just an obstacle. He was a man. A man with tired eyes and a touch that sent lightning through my carefully constructed ice. And that made him infinitely more dangerous than I had ever planned. The voice from the tiny speaker was tinny, distorted, but unmistakably Charles Ashworth's. "Can't keep pressuring the council, Eleanor. Marek handles the unpleasantness. That's what we pay him for." I sat on the floor of my hostel room, knees drawn to my chest, listening. The bug was working. For 2 weeks I'd endured the diner, the smell of grease clinging to my hair and clothes, all for these moments. I was mining for a specific kind of ore, a weakness, a secret, a transaction that didn't appear on any balance sheet. He's too effective, Eleanor's voice snipped back. He frightens people. We need a softer image, especially with the Children's Hospital charity auction next month. It's bad press if our head of security looks like he's about to break kneecaps during the silent auction. The charity auction. My mind, sharpened by years of forced observation, latched onto it. A public event. A vulnerable event. The Ashworths would be there, performing their philanthropy. It was a target. Marek stays, Charles said, his tone final. He ensures nothing goes wrong. The Veroni family has been making noises. I want him close. The Veroni family. Rivals. That was new. I filed it away. A different voice, lower, calmer, cut through the recording. Kales. The perimeter is secure. The guest list for the auction is being vetted now. I've recommended removing the Veroni associates. See? Charles said, sounding pleased. Anticipates problems. Do it, Marek. There's another matter, Kale continued, his voice dropping, becoming almost inaudible. I pressed the headphones tighter against my ears. The woman from the gala, Sloane Evans, her file is thin, recently released from Blackwood Correctional, embezzlement. The air left my lungs. I was a matter. A long silence. Then Eleanor, her voice dripping with disdain. A convict at my gala? How did she get in? I'm looking into it, but her conviction? It was the Harrison account, the one that sent old Miller to prison. Another pause, heavier this time. The Harrison account was the one they'd framed me for. Miller was the patsy before me. A coincidence? Charles said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Perhaps, Cale replied, and I could almost see the calculating look in his eyes. But I don't believe in coincidences. I'll handle it. The recording ended. I pulled the headphones off, my hands shaking. He was digging. He knew my name, my record. I'll handle it. The words were a cold threat. My plan was unraveling before it had truly begun. I had to move faster. The next day at the diner, I was on edge, jumping at the sound of the bell over the door. Every customer was a potential threat sent by Cale. I served plates of eggs and poured endless coffee, my smile a brittle mask. The lunch rush was dying down when the bell chimed again. I looked up, a generic greeting on my lips, and froze. Cale Merrick stood in the doorway. He didn't belong in the greasy spoon diner. He was too large, too polished, too intense. He wore dark jeans and a simple black Henley that stretched across his chest, and his presence seemed to suck the sound from the room. His gaze swept the space once, then landed on me with the force of a physical blow. My coworker Jenny elbowed me. Whoa, customer, 10 o'clock. Do you know him? No, I lied, my voice strangled. I'll get it. I grabbed a menu, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. I walked toward him, every step feeling like a walk to the gallows. He watched me approach, his expression unreadable. Welcome to Mel's, I said, my voice miraculously steady. I handed him the sticky menu. Booth or counter? Booth, he said, his eyes never leaving my face. He chose one in the back, with a clear view of both exits. Of course he did. I followed him, pulling out my order pad. What can I get for you? He didn't look at the menu. Coffee. Black. I nodded and turned to leave. Sloane? The sound of my name in that low, gravelly voice stopped me in my tracks. I turned back slowly. I did some digging, he said, his voice conversational, but his eyes were sharp as shards of glass. Blackwood. 5 years. That's a long time. The air grew thick. This was it. The confrontation. I forced myself to meet his gaze. Is there a point to this? Or do you just enjoy harassing ex-cons trying to wait tables? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It didn't reach his eyes. The point is, I find interesting people. You're interesting. You have a degree in forensic accounting, top of your class, and you end up taking the fall for a multi-million-dollar scheme. Then weeks after your release, you crash a high society gala with a forged invitation. Why? He'd done his homework. Deep homework. Panic was a live wire in my veins, but I channeled it into anger. It was the only defense I had. Maybe I wanted to see the people who live in the world that threw me away. Maybe I wanted to see if I could still walk in heels. What's it to you? It's my job to protect the Ashworths from threats. And I'm a threat? I let out a short, bitter laugh. Look around, Mr. Merrick. I'm serving meatloaf specials. The biggest threat I pose is giving someone food poisoning. He leaned back, studying me. The worn vinyl of the booth creaked. You're smarter than this place. Angrier, too. That's a dangerous combination. I leaned forward, planting my hands on the table, invading his space. It was a reckless move, but I needed to shift the power dynamic. You have no idea what I am. You think you can read my file and know me? You don't know what it's like to have everything taken from you. My name, my future, my brother. My voice cracked on the last word, a fissure of genuine pain I couldn't conceal. His eyes changed. The relentless scrutiny faltered, and for a heartbeat, I saw something else. Not pity, recognition. Your brother? He repeated softly. The diner door opened, letting in a burst of street noise. The moment broke. I straightened up, retreating behind my waitress persona. I'll get your coffee. When I returned with the mug, he was staring out the window, his profile stark. I set the coffee down. Anything else? He looked back at me. The Ashworth Foundation charity auction is in 3 weeks. They're short-staffed. It's a temp job. Setting up, coordinating items. It pays better than this. I stared at him, completely thrown. This was not the direction I expected this encounter to take. Was this his way of handling me? Keeping me close, where he could watch me? Why are you telling me this? Because everyone deserves a second chance, he said, but the word sounded rote, like something he was supposed to say. His eyes told a different story. They said, I'm watching you. It was a trap, an obvious, blatant trap, and it was the only way I was going to get inside that event. I held his gaze, the air crackling between us. It was a challenge, a dare. Where do I apply? I asked. He pulled a business card from his pocket and slid it across the table. It was simple, elegant, just his name and a number, no title. Ask for me. I'll vouch for you. I picked up the card. Our fingers didn't touch this time, but the intention was just as electric. He was throwing down a gauntlet, and I was picking it up. Thank you, I said, my voice steady. He gave a curt nod, threw a $5 bill on the table for the untouched coffee, and stood. He left without another word, the bell chiming his exit. I looked down at the card in my hand. Cale Marek. This was it. The inn I needed. He thought he was a hunter cornering his prey. He didn't realize the prey had claws, and a vengeance 5 years in the making. But as I watched his broad back disappear down the street, a treacherous thought whispered in my mind. The look in his eyes when I'd mentioned Leo, it hadn't been the look of a ruthless enforcer. It had been the look of a man who understood loss. And that understanding was a crack in his armor, a crack I could either exploit or fall into. The Ashworth Foundation offices were a study in controlled opulence. Glass, steel, and muted tones meant to convey seriousness and wealth. For the past 2 weeks, I'd been a temporary cog in their well-oiled machine, sorting donation forms and coordinating the delivery of auction items under the watchful eye of a perpetually flustered event coordinator. And under the far more penetrating gaze of Cale Marek. He was a ghost in the system. I'd feel his presence before I saw him, a shift in the air, a subtle stillness in the hallway. He never spoke to me unless necessary, his instructions curt and professional. The jewelry collection arrives at 3. Be there to log it. The catering floor plan is wrong. Fix it. But his eyes, those storm gray eyes, were always watching, assessing, asking the silent question. What are you really doing here? I played my part perfectly. The grateful, slightly overwhelmed ex-con, eager to prove herself. I stayed late, brought coffee for the team, and made sure the inventory lists were impeccable. I was building a profile of reliability, eroding his suspicion one meticulously completed task at a time. And I was learning. I learned that Charles Ashworth had a tell. He tapped his pen twice on his desk before telling a lie. I learned that Eleanor's personal assistant was skimming from the petty cash, a tidbit I stored away for potential leverage. And I learned that Cale Merrick was more than just a security chief. He was a fixer, the person they called when a disgruntled former employee made threats, when a business partner got too greedy, when the dirty laundry needed to be taken out without a trace. The day of the charity auction, the air was thick with tension. The venue, a modern art museum, was swarming with staff, volunteers, and Cale's security team. I was assigned to the preview room where the high-value items were displayed: vintage wines, luxury vacations, a diamond necklace that glittered under the spotlights like frozen tears. I had my own agenda for tonight. Tucked into the lining of my simple black staff dress was a different device, a tiny, high-capacity data stick loaded with a worm. My target was the auction laptop, which would be connected to the Foundation's internal server to process winning bids. If I could get physical access for just 30 seconds, I could plant it. It was a long shot, a Hail Mary pass, but it was the best opportunity I'd had. The evening began. The rich and powerful drifted through the preview room, champagne flutes in hand. I pointed out features of a signed first edition, explained the provenance of a sapphire brooch, all while keeping one eye on the laptop, set up on a small podium at the back of the room. It was guarded, but the guard's attention was on the crowd. My moment came when a commotion erupted near the entrance. A well-known, belligerent tech billionaire was arguing with a junior staff member about his seating arrangement. It was the distraction I needed. The guard at the laptop took a step forward, his focus pulled toward the conflict. I moved, a silent shadow. I slipped behind the podium, my back to the room, my body shielding the laptop. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I pulled the data stick from my dress, my fingers trembling. Just plug it in. 30 seconds was all I needed. A hand closed over mine. It was large, warm, and utterly immovable. I didn't have to look up to know who it was. The scent of cedar and clean soap told me everything. Cale. He didn't wrench my arm away. He simply held my hand, the data stick trapped between our skin. His touch was like a brand. I could feel the calluses on his palms, the strength in his grip that was, for now, perfectly controlled. Looking for a port, Sloane? His voice was a low murmur, for my ears only. It wasn't angry. It was disappointed. Terror and shame washed over me in a cold wave. I was caught. It was over. He would call the police. I'd go back to prison, and Leo's memory would be forever stained by my failure. I looked up, meeting his eyes. The storm in them was calm, knowing. "I can explain," I whispered, the lie automatic and pathetic. "No," he said softly, "you can't." He plucked the data stick from my nerveless fingers and pocketed it. Then, his hand still wrapped around mine, he guided me away from the podium, his body positioning itself between me and the rest of the room. He wasn't escorting a prisoner. To anyone watching, it looked like the head of security was quietly conferring with a staff member. He led me through a service door and into a stark concrete hallway that led to the loading docks. The sounds of the gala faded, replaced by the hum of industrial lighting. He released my hand and I stumbled back a step, my back hitting the cool concrete wall. This was it, the reckoning. He stood before me, a wall of silent, imposing muscle. He didn't speak. He just looked at me, and the weight of his gaze was worse than any accusation. "How long have you known?" I finally asked, my voice raw. "Since the diner," he said. The bug in the piano was amateur. The audio quality was poor, but the placement was clever. I knew it was you before I even sat down in that booth. I closed my eyes, a fresh wave of humiliation crashing over me. I had been so arrogant, so sure of my own cleverness. He had been playing me from the start. Why? I opened my eyes, defiance sparking through the fear. Why give me the job? Why lead me here just to catch me? Why not just turn me in? He took a step closer, crowding me. The space between us crackled with a dangerous energy. Because I wanted to see what you would do. I wanted to know if you were just a common criminal or if there was something more. His eyes searched my face. The file said embezzlement. But your eyes screamed something else. The dam inside me broke. The 5 years of silence, of swallowed rage, of grief for Leo, it all came pouring out. They framed me. The words were a ragged sob. Charles Ashworth handed me the documents himself. He said, "Be a team player, Sloane. Sign here." I was 22. I thought I was lucky. And when it all went wrong, they let me take the fall. They promised they'd take care of my brother, but they cut him off. He died alone in a hospital bed while I was in a cage. Tears I couldn't stop streamed down my face. I was laid bare before him, all my plans, my vengeance, crumbling into the raw, aching truth. Cale didn't move. He just watched me unravel, his expression unreadable. And this? He held up the data stick. This was your justice? It was a starting point, I cried. It was something. It was all I had. He was silent for a long moment, the only sound my ragged breathing. He looked down at the data stick in his hand, then back at my tear-streaked face. "My younger sister," he said, his voice so quiet I almost missed it. "Lena, she was smart, like you. Wanted to be a doctor. Got mixed up with the wrong person. A low-level dealer with connections to a group I had dealings with. I was overseas. I couldn't protect her." He swallowed, a hard, visible movement in his throat. "There was an overdose. They called it an accident. I knew it wasn't." The confession hung in the cold air between us, a shared language of loss. He wasn't just the Ashworth's attack dog. He was a man haunted by his own failures, his own need for a justice that had been denied. "I took this job because the Ashworths promised me the resources to find the man responsible for Lena," he continued, his gaze intense. "They provide a shield, a network, but the price is my soul. I clean up their messes. I look the other way. I protect people who deserve to be torn down." He took a final step, closing the distance completely. He was so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. He lifted his hand and, with a shocking gentleness, brushed a tear from my cheek with his thumb. The touch was electric, a solace I didn't know I craved. "I believe you, Sloane," he whispered. Those 3 words shattered me more completely than any handcuff ever could. He believed me. The one man who could destroy me believed my truth. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Now," he said, his thumb still tracing a slow, hypnotic path on my cheek. "We have a decision to make. I can give you this back." He pressed the data stick into my palm, closing my fingers around it. His hand enveloped mine, warm and strong. "And you can walk away, find a different path. Or," I breathed, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Or you can trust me," he said, his gray eyes holding mine captive. "The Ashworths didn't just destroy your life, Sloane. They're a cancer. And maybe it's time someone cut it out. Together. Together." The word was a lifeline and a precipice. To trust him was to betray my solitary mission, to place my vengeance, my freedom, my fragile, newly awakened heart in the hands of the man who was supposed to be my enemy. I looked down at our joined hands, at the data stick pressed between our palms. The path of revenge was clear, solitary and cold. The path with him was shrouded in mist, dangerous and terrifyingly warm. I lifted my gaze to his. The storm in his eyes had quieted, replaced by a question and a promise. "Together," I said. And for the first time, I saw a real, genuine smile touch Cale Merrick's lips. It transformed his entire face, carving away the harshness and revealing the man beneath the armor. It was the most dangerous thing I had ever seen. Trust was a foreign country, and I was a hesitant immigrant. In the days following the auction, every instinct I'd honed in prison screamed at me that this was a trick, an elaborate trap Cale was setting to get a full confession. But the memory of his hand on my cheek, the raw pain in his voice when he spoke of his sister, that felt like a truth no man could fake. Our partnership began in the shadows. We communicated through burner phones. our meetings brief and clandestine. He was a ghost in the machine of my life, appearing beside my car in a deserted parking garage after my diner shift, or meeting me on a park bench in the pre-dawn gloom. He brought me files, not the sanitized public records, but the real ones. Internal Ashworth Foundation audits, offshore account numbers buried in layers of shell companies, encrypted emails between Charles and a man named Silas Veroni, the very rival he'd claimed to be protecting himself from. They're not just embezzling, Cale said one morning, his breath misting in the cold air. We were by the river, the water a sluggish gray mirror of the overcast sky. They're laundering money for Veroni. The charitable donations are payoffs. The construction projects are fronts. The foundation is a car wash for dirty cash. The scale of it was staggering. My personal vendetta suddenly felt small, a single thread in a vast rotten tapestry. Why show me this? I asked, my voice small. You could take this to the FBI yourself. He looked out at the water, his jaw tight. Because it's not enough. It's financial. It's complicated. They'll get slaps on the wrist, fancy lawyers will tie it up for years, and I'll be out of a job in a network before I find the man who gave Lena the drugs that killed her. I need leverage. The kind that doesn't just put them in a courtroom, but destroys them. The kind you understand. Leverage. The word was a key turning in a lock. He wasn't just seeking justice, he was seeking annihilation. And he believed I was the one who could help him achieve it. The listening device, I said slowly, the pieces clicking together. The one you found in the piano. The audio was poor, but you kept it. Why? A grim smile touched his lips. Because while the quality was bad, the content was interesting. Charles mentioned a warehouse transfer the night of the gala. He was nervous about it. I've been cross-referencing all their properties. There's one. On the old industrial docks. It's not on any public ledger. They pay the taxes through a holding company in the Caymans. The target crystallized, a physical location, a place where the abstract numbers on a screen became something real, something we could touch, something we could use. We need to get inside, I said, the old familiar thrill of the hunt surging through me, now sharpened by a new, terrifying partnership. The security is mine, Cale replied. I designed it. I can get us in. But it's not just cameras and motion sensors. There are men, Veroni's men. They guard the physical assets, the cash, the untraceable jewels, the books that would never see the light of day. It's not a heist, Sloane. It's an incursion. The plan was set for a week later, a night when a major citywide blackout was scheduled for grid maintenance, a cover I never would have had without Cale's inside knowledge. The hours leading up to it were an agony of suspended animation. At the diner, I spilled a tray of drinks. At my hostel, I paced like a caged animal. I was terrified, not just of getting caught, but of trusting him. What if this was his way of leading me into a den of his own men? What if I walked into that warehouse and found Charles Ashworth waiting with a smug smile and a pair of handcuffs? But when I saw him waiting in the shadows of the docklands, all my doubts quieted. He was dressed in black tactical gear, a stark silhouette against the inky water. He looked every inch the soldier, a man in his element. He handed me a comms unit and a small, powerful flashlight. Stay close. Do exactly as I say, he murmured, his voice calm and focused in my ear. The blackout starts in 10 minutes. We have a 20-minute window before the backup generators at the main security hub kick in. He led the way, moving with a predator's grace through the maze of rusting cranes and decaying warehouses. Our target was a building that looked no different from the others. Its windows boarded, its door secured by a heavy chain and a state-of-the-art digital lock. Cale bypassed it in seconds with a device that emitted a series of soft, clicking sounds. The door swung open into darkness that smelled of salt, rust, and something else, the faint, sweet scent of money. The blackout hit right on schedule, plunging the world into profound silence and blackness. We switched on our lights, the beams cutting through the dust-filled air. The warehouse was not empty. It was a gallery of corruption. Pallets of shrink-wrapped cash stood like monuments. Metal shelves held boxes of gold bars, their weight seeming to bend the steel. And along one wall, filing cabinets stood, their drawers filled with the proof that could bring down an empire. "The books," I whispered, my heart leaping. "That's what we need." We worked quickly, a synchronized team. Cale stood guard, his body a tense wire, his gaze fixed on the doors as I used my phone to photograph page after page of ledgers. The numbers swam before my eyes. Millions funneled, dates, code names. It was all here. The entire, ugly truth. We were halfway through the third cabinet when Cale's hand shot out, grabbing my arm. "Stop." I froze. "What is it?" He didn't answer. He was listening, his head tilted. Then I heard it too. The low growl of an engine, the crunch of tires on gravel outside. Too early. Far too early for the backup generators. "They're here," he said, his voice dropping to a lethal calm. "Veroni's men. They shouldn't be doing a patrol for another hour." How did they know? His eyes met mine in the gloom, and I saw the same chilling realization in them. They didn't. Someone told them. The trap wasn't for me. It was for him. Someone within the Ashworth organization, or perhaps Veroni himself, had discovered Cale's disloyalty and had laid a perfect snare. The main door shuddered as someone began working on the lock from the outside. "Back door," Cale commanded, shoving the last of the ledgers into a waterproof bag. "Now." We moved fast, our lights bobbing as we sprinted toward the rear of the warehouse. Cale kicked open a rusted emergency exit, and we spilled out into a narrow alley between buildings. We weren't alone. Two figures emerged from the shadows, blocking our path to the water. They were big, armed, and they didn't look like they were there to talk. "Take the bag. Run for the extraction point," Cale ordered, shoving the bag of evidence into my hands. He was already moving, placing his body between me and the threat. "I'm not leaving you. Sloane, go." The command was absolute. The two men lunged. What happened next was a brutal, efficient ballet of violence. Cale moved with a shocking speed, disarming the first man with a vicious twist of his wrist, the crack of bone audible in the night. The man's gun clattered to the ground. The second man fired, the shot whining past my head and ricocheting off the brick wall. I screamed, frozen in place. Cale didn't flinch. He closed the distance, his movements a blur of controlled fury. He used the man's own momentum against him, slamming him into the wall with a sickening thud. The man slid to the ground, unconscious, but more were coming. Voices shouted from the front of the warehouse. Headlights swept the alley's entrance. Cale grabbed my arm, his grip iron. "We're not going to make the extraction. This way." He pulled me down a side alley, our footsteps echoing in the narrow space. We burst out onto a deserted service road, the river a black expanse ahead of us. The only cover was a dilapidated boathouse, its doors hanging off their hinges. "In here," he gasped, shoving me inside the dark, damp space. The smell of rot and stagnant water was overwhelming. We crouched behind a rotting wooden hull, our breaths coming in ragged pants. Outside, we could hear the shouts of our pursuers, the beams of their flashlights cutting through the cracks in the walls. We were cornered. In the profound darkness, the world shrunk to the space between our bodies. I could feel the heat coming off him, hear the steady, strong beat of his heart, a stark contrast to the frantic rabbit pulse of my own. The adrenaline was a live wire in my veins, but underneath it was a colder, more profound fear. The fear of losing him. This man, my enemy, my ally, the keeper of my secrets. "Cale?" I whispered, my voice trembling. He turned to me. In the sliver of moonlight filtering through a broken plank, I could see the grim set of his mouth, the fierce protectiveness in his eyes. "I'm sorry," I said, the words ripped from me. "I led them to you. This is my fault." "No," he said, his voice low and certain. His hand came up, his fingers tangling in the hair at the nape of my neck. "This was always coming. I'm glad you're here." It was the most illogical, insane thing he could have said, and it was the only thing that made sense. His gaze dropped to my lips. The world outside, the shouting men, the danger, the 5 years of pain and the thirst for vengeance, all of it faded into a distant hum. There was only this: the heat of his body, the scent of his skin, the terrifying, exhilarating truth that had been building between us since the moment he caught my hand on the data stick. He didn't ask. He didn't hesitate. He closed the final inch between us and captured my mouth with his. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision, a claiming. It was 5 years of loneliness and a lifetime of loss meeting a wall of unyielding strength. It tasted of fear and salt and a desperate, wild hope. I kissed him back with everything I had, my hands fisting in the fabric of his tactical vest, pulling him closer. It was an anchor in the storm, a confession in the dark, a promise sealed not with words, but with shared breath. The sound of a voice, sharp and close, shattered the moment. "Check the boathouse." We broke apart, our foreheads resting together, breathing each other's air. His eyes were dark pools of fire and resolve. "When I move, you run for the water," he breathed against my lips. "There's a boat. 50 yards down. Don't look back." He was going to be the diversion, the sacrifice. Before I could protest, he was on his feet. He kicked the boathouse door open with a splintering crash and stepped out into the night, a silhouette against the searchlights. "Looking for me?" he roared. The gunfire erupted instantly, and I ran. I ran until my lungs screamed. The waterproof bag of evidence clutched to my chest like a newborn. The sound of gunfire echoed over the water, each report a bullet tearing through my soul. Cale. I didn't look back. His sacrifice would be meaningless if I failed now. The boat was there, a small, dark inflatable tucked in the reeds as he'd promised. I scrambled in, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the engine started. When it finally sputtered to life, I pointed it toward the distant glow of the city and opened the throttle, leaving the nightmare of the docks behind. I didn't allow myself to think, to feel. I was a machine, fueled by terror and the ghost of his kiss on my lips. I went to ground in a different hostel, paying cash for a room that smelled of mildew and despair. For 24 hours, I was catatonic. I saw his face in the darkness, heard his final command: "Don't look back." I curled into a ball on the thin mattress, the bag of ledgers my only companion. The vengeance I had craved for so long now tasted like ash. Without him, it was empty. On the second day, as dawn bled gray light through the dirty window, something hardened inside me. Grief solidified into resolve. Cale had believed in me. He had given me the tools to finish this. To run now, to hide, would be to dishonor everything he'd done. I spent the day in a public library using their computers. I cross-referenced the photos I'd taken with public records, corporate filings, anything I could find. The story the ledgers told was undeniable. They detailed not just the money laundering, but payoffs to city officials, the specific account used to pay off the witness who'd lied at my trial, and, my breath caught, a series of large, untraceable payments from Charles Ashworth to a known enforcer in the Veroni family, dated 1 week after Cale's sister, Lena, had died. It was all here, their empire and their murderous treachery. I knew what I had to do: a public spectacle, a final irreversible move. I couldn't just send this to the authorities. The Ashworths had worms in every institution. I had to make it so public, so explosive, that no one could bury it. The New Dawn Project was the Ashworths' crown jewel, a billion-dollar waterfront development meant to cement their legacy as visionaries. The press conference to break ground was a media circus. Charles and Eleanor stood on a pristine podium, hard hats on, golden shovels in hand, smiling for the bank of cameras. I walked into the crowd of reporters and onlookers, dressed in the same simple professional clothes I'd worn at the foundation. I looked like staff. I moved like I belonged. My heart was a cold, steady drum in my chest. I saw Charles's eyes scan the crowd, a flicker of unease in his practiced smile. Did he sense it? The reckoning approaching? I didn't head for the podium. I headed for the giant screen behind it, where a slick promotional video was playing. The AV technician looked up, annoyed, as I approached his station. Mr. Ashworth needs you to run this, I said, my voice calm as I handed him the data stick, the same one Cale had pressed back into my hand. It now held a curated, devastating slideshow of their crimes. The tech, a young kid, didn't question it. He plugged it in. I turned and walked toward the podium. Charles saw me then. His smile froze, then cracked. His eyes widened in pure, undiluted terror. He knew. Eleanor, following his gaze, let out a small, choked gasp. Sloane, Charles hissed, his voice cutting through his lapel microphone. What are you? The video behind him flickered and died. For a second, there was silence. Then a new image bloomed on the giant screen. A scanned page from a ledger with a transaction highlighted in yellow. Payment to witness number 4, false testimony, Sloane Evans trial. The crowd murmured, confused. Turn it off, Charles roared, dropping his golden shovel with a clatter. The screen changed. Another page. City Councilman Briggs, rezoning override, $250,000. A collective gasp went up. I stepped up to the spare microphone at the side of the podium. My voice, when it came out, was clear and strong, carrying across the square. My name is Sloane Evans. 5 years ago, Charles and Eleanor Ashworth framed me for their crimes and sent me to prison. They promised to care for my dying brother, and they abandoned him. They have laundered money, bribed officials, and corrupted everything they've touched. I looked directly at Charles, my gaze unwavering. And, Charles, we found the payments to the man who supplied the drugs that killed Cale Marrick's sister. You didn't just destroy my life. You ordered a murder to keep your head of security in line. Chaos erupted. Reporters surged forward, shouting questions. Camera flashes exploded like a strobe light. Charles Ashworth was having a full-blown panic attack, clutching his chest, while Eleanor screamed at the AV tech, her face a grotesque mask of fury. It was over. I had done it. I had torn them down in front of the whole world. But as security guards finally broke through the crowd and started toward me, I felt no triumph. Only a hollow, aching loss. I had my vengeance, but I had lost the man who had made me remember what it was to feel something other than hate. The guards grabbed my arms. I didn't resist. I was ready to go back to a cell. It was a price I was willing to pay. Let her go. The voice was ragged, weak, but it carried a familiar, absolute authority. Every head turned, and there at the edge of the crowd, leaning heavily on Lucia, stood Cale. He was a mess. His face was bruised and swollen, one arm was in a sling, and he moved with a pronounced limp. But he was alive. His stormy eyes found mine across the chaos, and the look in them was one of fierce, unshakable pride. The guards, his own men, immediately released me. He limped toward me, Lucia supporting his weight, the crowd parting for him like the Red Sea. He stopped in front of me, his gaze drinking me in as if I were water in a desert. You're alive, I whispered, tears finally spilling over. I reached out a trembling hand, afraid to touch him and find him a mirage. He caught my hand, his grip strong despite his injuries. Takes more than a few Veroni thugs to put me down. He gave me a pained, lopsided smile that made my heart stutter. I heard what you did. Every word. You were magnificent. He looked over at the Ashworths, who were now being read their rights by federal agents who had materialized in the crowd. Lucia's work, no doubt. Cale's expression turned to stone. It's over. He turned back to me, his voice softening. For both of us. Weeks later, the city was still buzzing with the fallout. The Ashworth empire was in free fall, assets frozen, indictments rolling in. I was exonerated, my record expunged. The world saw me as a victim turned victor. But my world had shrunk to the four walls of Cale's apartment. A different one, a bright, airy loft with a view of the river, a world away from the fortified penthouse. He'd quit, of course. The network he'd used to avenge his sister was gone, but the man who had killed Lena was in custody. thanks to the evidence we'd uncovered. I was tending to the plants on his balcony when his arms slipped around my waist from behind. He rested his chin on my shoulder, his body a warm, solid presence against my back. His injuries were healing, but the emotional scars, like mine, would take longer. "The DA's office called again," he murmured into my hair. "They want you to consult. Your forensic accounting skills are legendary." I leaned back into him, savoring his warmth. "What do you think?" "I think," he said, turning me gently in his arms to face him, "that you should do whatever makes you happy." His gray eyes were clear now, the storms calmed. "We have time to figure it out. All the time in the world." He kissed me then, not with the desperate passion of the boathouse, but with a slow, deep tenderness that promised a future. It was a kiss of healing, of partnership, of a love that had been forged in the fires of vengeance and had emerged, tempered and strong, on the other side. Later, we sat on the sofa, my legs draped over his, watching the city lights twinkle on. The silence between us was comfortable, a shared language of two people who had seen the worst of each other and the world, and had chosen to stay. "I used to think freedom was getting out of prison," I said quietly, my head on his shoulder. "But that was just the beginning. With you, this is the real thing." He pressed a kiss to my temple, his hand finding mine and lacing our fingers together. "The contract is void," he said, a playful echo of his words from what felt like a lifetime ago. "But the offer stands, permanently." I looked up at him, at the man who had been my enemy, my ally, my protector, and was now my home. The path of revenge had been a dark, solitary road. The path with him was lit with possibility. "It's a deal," I said, smiling. And as his lips found mine again under the soft glow of the city night, I knew I had finally found the justice I'd been searching for. It wasn't in their ruin. It was in our beginning. Love stories that steal your heart? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more irresistible romance.